Hello, today we will look at complex adaptive systems because they are very good to know about. So, a complex adaptive system is a system that is made up of a lot of agents and that which changes depending on its environment or its context. So the agents are reacting and acting against each other, and it will create a bigger pattern of organization. And the agents are using cybernetics to regulate themselves to both changes in the environment and from other agents. So for example, it can be the plants and the species in nature which are reacting on each other depending on what species are nearby. For example, a tree will change depending on how much water it's in the soil and how much nutrients there are, so it will change its growing pattern, and the forest will change depending on the circumstances and which animals are there and so. And what we will go through are these 4 parts: adaptive systems, game theory, which is how agents are reacting towards each other, evolution, and then resilience, which is a characteristic of an adaptive system. So, some concepts of complex adaptive systems are that they always have value systems, so how an agent knows how to behave in its environment is depending on what it is reaching for, so it has some kind of value system that it's trying to achieve. So for example, a tree wants to grow and it wants to grow old. Cybernetics is then how this is controlled, which kind of inputs, which outputs, but most importantly, what functions and mechanisms are handling these inputs to produce the outputs that you want. So what sensors do you have, and how, like depending on, for example, how much water there is available in the soil, how should I behave? So there's some kind of relationships there, which is the control. And it can be feedback, so depending on if you take up much water, there might be less water in the soil, so it will be some feedback. And homeostasis, that is, it's a stable condition where the system tries to be stable to manage changing circumstances. Regulation is the concept that keeps the system in its stable state. And feedback regulation, it's like an interaction between the different systems or agents in the system. But it can also be it can be producer and consumers decide the price depending on their engagement and who's buying what. It can also be a tree and a bird, so they decide, they have some feedback related to them. So if there's a lot of trees with bird food, there might be more birds. But if there are a lot of birds, there might be less new trees. So that's the feedback. Second order cybernetics. It's how oneself is seeing one's position in the system. So it's also the observer there. And we have an adaptive cycle here. So this is how the complex adaptive systems is behaving. On and on and on, looping through infinite. So it reorganizes itself because it needs to adapt to its new circumstances. Then it will use this new organization to grow, to do something new. Then it will find this equilibrium state, this stable state, homeostasis. And then there will be some external influence, something that disturbs the system, which releases some of the stable part, and it needs to reorganize itself again. Then it goes on and on. And then we have the other topics, which is for example, game theory. So game theory is just to understand how the actors in the system are interacting, if they are cooperating or if they are not cooperating, and which outcomes that will provide. And the system can be built to initiate cooperation, or it can be built to initiate competition, so non-cooperative. So a zero-sum game is when, playing chess, is when one loses and one wins. So the lose plus the win will sum to zero. But when it's non-zero-sum games, then both parties, agents, can win, and they will it will benefit everyone, or it can also be worse for everyone, but it doesn't have to even out. So that is so cooperation can be seen as the best outcome, but when there is competition, there is more self-interest and not acting in the common good. So the private interest steers, and there might be absence of some overall coordination that aligns common good with the private interest. For example, environmental emissions. We are not incentivized to not emit any carbon dioxide because it's kind of cheap, and the damage that one person or one industry is doing is spread out over the whole population. So you gain more from emitting CO2 than you are from, and it's less negative outcomes for you. So it's worth it to do it anyway, because you will have more benefit rather than negative outcomes. And some other concepts. So non-cooperative games are more competition when there are zero-sum, for example, chess. Prisoner's dilemma is when it's like an old saying, or dilemma where there are two prisoners who are not incentivized to cooperate, but like if one only cooperate, either they get one very good outcome and one very bad, but if they cooperate, they both get a little bit bad, but the sum of them makes it the best option rather than one having very good and one very bad. And then the social dilemma is when individual rational behavior leads to a situation where everyone is worse off. And that's when, self-interest is at odds with collective interest, like the environmental emissions. And cooperation is non-zero games. So then either all the players win or all the players lose. So there's actually an attractor there to build cooperation, because it might be beneficial for both the individual and the group. Like international trade, it might benefit both nations. That's why they do it. And how to achieve cooperation is that it's mostly like social and economic institutions that needs to provide the infrastructure that enables trust between agents, so that everyone chooses the cooperative outcome and everyone will get best payoff. So it's like a design of the system, so that, okay, if you do this, it should be both in my self-interest and it should be the common good. So it's how to align self-interest with the group's interests. So it might be some external enforcement by some legal authority, some governments. It's also made, for example, to not involving criminality, like those kinds of laws. Or it can be taxes, so you shouldn't emit because you get to pay a tax, for example, and it's also good for them, for the whole group. So that is some concepts. And then we have evolution, which also is an important part of complex adaptive systems. So it's the adaptation of a group of entities that occurs on a macro level throughout many life cycles, reflecting the response of the collective of agents to changes in the environment. And how it works is that something is changing. There is some kind of variety, and then it's selection between those that are most adapted and most successful. And then those are the fittest one to continue going on. So this is evolution in biology. And then it can be also in politics, where there is a new change of dynamics in the politics. You have some new politicians, you select the politician, and then those are the ones building the group to steer the country. Economics, new like technology, innovation creates more alternatives and variety on the market. You select, maybe you choose one smartphone which you like, and the other ones will start also doing those kinds of products. Then we have the last part, which is about resilience, which is an important characteristic of a complex adaptive system. We have three concepts we can also compare, which is resilience, robustness, and reactiveness. So robustness is the part where a system is hindering change. So, for example, that a forest is having long roots to not fall apart when there is a wind coming. So you robust yourself for the disruption not to affect you. Resilience, it's making then the load from the wind less by changing how the trees are bending. And it also might, on a forest level, it might be that the new trees are more stable than the generation before, because there is the ones that are surviving these harsh winters. And reactive is how fast you can change towards these new concepts. So the resilience is to continue having its function even though there is some kind of disruption. So it's about always keeping the function study. It's like your immune system, like a person is able to walk, able to talk. If there's a disruption like a cold, your body system comes with an immune system trying to still hold your function up high. So that is some kind of resilience that your body shows. Dependence is that, yeah, a body needs food, so it's a dependency of certain inputs, and the food system needs sunlight and water. And anti-fragility, it is the function to actually learn from disruptions and actually become better afterwards. So how to use the disruption as learning. And robust is to be stable in its constant state. Disruption is something that affects the system negatively, like a forest fire. A resilient strategy is then okay. This forest then comes with new species, and it will that might be less less vulnerable for forest fires. And yeah, this is the concept of complex adaptive system. And of course, I should also mention something about animal factory farming. And I will talk about the food system because that is a complex adaptive system. So depending on what the consumers want, depending on which soil we have, depending on the market pricing, that will decide what the producers are producing. So there is always an interaction between many different actors in the system. And I think it can be good to understand that, not to use it directly towards animal well-being, but to use these complex adaptive systems concepts to understand the food system where animals are bred, and often not in a very good way. So to be able to change that and to enable animal well-being, we need to know, okay, but why are they here? What factors are influencing? How is the system resilient? What different incentives are they according to game theory? How can we incentivize? For example, now there's very little transparency in the animal food production towards citizens and consumers, because the producers are not incentivized, because it's cheaper to not have very good welfare, so they choose not to show it. But if there would be more transparency and the consumers could actually see how the animals are treated, then you would probably buy animal food products where the animal are treated well, and that will make the incentive for the producer to treat the animals well and make sure they can express their natural behaviors. So I think full transparency would make the system more cooperative, for example.